We really need to talk about a prison system that got so broken, the federal government actually had to step in. And the fix they came up with? Well, it's a multi-billion-dollar plan that kind of raises a huge question. Are they buying a real solution or just a much, much bigger problem?
So that's really the question at the heart of all this. And in Alabama, the answer is a number so big, it's honestly hard to wrap your head around.
$5 billion. Just let that sink in for a second. That's the 5-year price tag for Alabama's prison system. We're talking about $1 billion a year. So how on earth did one state's corrections budget spiral into the billions?
To really get why they're spending this kind of money, you first have to understand the sheer scale of the crisis. I mean, this wasn't some decision made in a vacuum. It was a desperate response to a system that was, by just about every account, completely falling apart.
The problems were, and this is not an exaggeration, catastrophic. You've got nearly $500 million in what they call deferred maintenance. That's all the crucial repairs that were ignored for years until the buildings were literally crumbling. But it was so much worse than just that. We're talking about rampant violence, sexual abuse, dangerous overcrowding, and a record number of people dying inside. It got so bad the U.S. Department of Justice actually had to sue the state, calling it a full-blown humanitarian crisis.
And this quote right here, it just nails how serious this was. This isn't from some advocacy group. This is the federal government on the record declaring that life inside Alabama's prisons was a state of constant peril. When the DOJ uses language that strong, you know a state is going to be forced to do something big.
Okay, so you've got this undeniable crisis, a federal lawsuit breathing down your neck. What do you do? Well, Alabama unveiled its solution. And it wasn't about small fixes or gradual reforms. No, it was about starting over with a massive, massive construction project.
The whole thing was called the Alabama Prison Transformation Initiative. The idea, at least on paper, was pretty simple. Shut down more than a dozen of these old, dangerous facilities and replace them with just a few brand new, modern mega prisons. The state pitched this as a chance to become a national model for corrections.
Now this is where it gets really interesting, because this slide lays out the official logic. For every single major problem, these new prisons were presented as the perfect fix. Crumbling buildings? We'll give you state-of-the-art ones. Overcrowding? We'll fix it. And they promised operational savings, the idea that newer, better-designed facilities would be cheaper to run, saving money on staffing and overtime that could help pay for everything. Plus, they said there'd finally be space for the rehabilitation programs that were basically impossible in the old prisons. That was the promise.
But, the reality of paying for all this, that turned into a completely different story. The promised solution came with a price tag that just kept going up, and up, and up.
Just look at this timeline. Back in 2016, the whole plan for 4 new prisons was supposed to cost around $800 million. Okay, then by 2021, lawmakers approved $1.3 billion, thinking, all right, that should cover at least 2 of them. But by 2024, it becomes clear that the first prison alone would cost nearly that entire amount. And when you add those huge construction costs to the regular and also ballooning operational budget, that's how you get to that staggering $5 billion figure over just 5 years.
To really wrap your head around that construction cost, let's look at it another way. The cost to build just one single bed in the new mega prison is about $300,000.
So get this, it costs way more to build one space for one person in a new Alabama prison than it does to buy the average home in the entire state. I mean, when you see it laid out like that, the sheer scale of this investment becomes incredibly real. And that investment is having a huge impact on the state's budget. This chart shows Alabama's general fund. That's basically the main pot of money the state can spend how it wants. The prison system, ADOC, eats up a full 25% of it. A quarter. That's more than all the combined budgets for critical prevention and well-being agencies. It's second only to Medicaid, which provides healthcare for about 1 million people in the state.
So as you can imagine, with costs blowing up like this and the budget getting squeezed, the whole mega prison solution has become deeply controversial. People are criticizing how it's being funded and questioning whether it can even deliver on what it promised in the first place.
And here's a move that was, maybe the most controversial part of the whole thing. The decision to use $400 million from the federal COVID-19 relief package to help build these prisons. Funneling money meant for pandemic recovery into prison construction, well, that drew national criticism and raised some serious questions about the state's priorities.
In this quote from Carla Crowder of Alabama Appleseed, it really gets to the heart of that criticism. The argument is that this isn't just about spending money on prisons, it's about what that money isn't being spent on.
Every $1 billion spent on incarceration is $1 billion not spent on things like mental health care or drug treatment or services that could actually prevent crime before it ever happens.
Now remember, one of the main selling points for this whole thing, the central promise, was that these new, efficient prisons would let the state finally shut down its most dangerous and run-down facilities for good. That was key.
But here's the thing. Now, even some lawmakers are starting to express serious doubts. With the prison population actually going up, people are wondering if the state can really afford to close those old facilities like they promised. The big fear is that Alabama could end up with a brand new billion-dollar prison and still have to keep many of the old, dangerous ones running.
And look, this isn't something that just happened overnight. This table shows a really dramatic shift in budget priorities over 2 decades. As the Department of Corrections has eaten up a bigger and bigger slice of the state's money, the share going to agencies like the Department of Human Resources has actually shrunk from over 7% down to just 4.5%.
So, okay, we've talked about the $5 billion. But beyond the money, what's the true cost here? What has this historic spending spree actually meant for the people living and working inside Alabama's prisons?
Well, the results are devastating. While the state was so focused on construction, the parole board basically stopped letting people out, which only made the overcrowding worse. So a policy decision completely undermined a key goal of the building project. And at the same time, violence, overdoses, and deaths inside the prisons have actually gotten worse, not better. And with a huge population now serving life sentences, you know long-term medical costs are set to explode. All while millions are still being spent on lawyers to fight the very lawsuits that started this whole thing.
And then there's this. In a move that's just loaded with symbolism, the state announced that the new billion-dollar facility will be named after the governor who championed this plan, Kay Ivey.
And this quote from journalist Beth Shelburne, it really frames the deep controversy around that decision. For critics, naming the prison after the governor isn't celebrating reform at all. It's a symbol of a strategy that they feel prioritizes buildings over people and just locks in mass incarceration for another generation.
Which really leaves us with this final question. Alabama is spending billions on new buildings, but the human crisis inside its prisons is just getting worse. It really forces you to ask, if a new building is the answer, are we even asking the right question? And if a state-of-the-art facility costs over $1 billion, what is the real price of true reform?